Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yes, let's get in the mode. There we go. My name is Lee. I'm a distinguished vice president, analyst, and Gartner fellow, which is like a lot of words to put into a title. I don't know why. I don't like to talk about myself too much, so I'm not going to do a ton of background. But I've had a lot of different roles in our industry. In addition to being a researcher for CISO research, I spent about 13 years in CIO and CEO research. I've been CTO of one of the world's largest mortgage banks. I ran a business for one of the big 5 consultancies. I've done a little bit of stuff. And what we're going to be talking about this morning are Gartner's top cybersecurity predictions 22, 23 to 2024. Don't try and say numbers on stage if you're dyslexic. It doesn't work well. Anyway, how are we all feeling this morning? We're having a great one? All right. Well, let's get into it. We're not going to read disclaimer sides. So, right off the bat, I want to just sort of get out here and say that I know that many of you think that Gartner's business model is all about scaring the heck out of you guys so that you'll buy more Gartner licenses. And I'm not going to deny that, because we do seem to come out here every year and we're like, there's a new convergence of things and the world is going to end. That is not what we're meaning to do with this. There's always a new convergence of things, and in our world, in the cybersecurity world, the world is always going to end. I'm not here to scare the heck out of you guys, but there are some fairly interesting convergences going on right now when we start thinking about cybersecurity operating models. The tremendous move into business technologists, the expansion of our attack surface to basically the entire internet is forcing us to think about and change how we scale. And indeed, you're going to hear me come back many times and say that word to you over and over and over again, scale. If you think about the core mission of every CEO that we support, whether you're a public sector CEO, a cabinet secretary, or whether you're a large enterprise CEO, every single CEO is ultimately measured on their ability to scale their enterprise. Because if you can scale differently, that's differentiation through cost and through performance. And if you can scale differently, that's differentiation in mission performance and the cost that taxpayers ultimately have to pay. That is the goal. And unfortunately, in cybersecurity, we are now being confronted with that self-same goal. What is it? IOC Squared said that there's something like, 3.5 million more open jobs in our industry than there are people to do them. The U.S. Department of Labor said last year that the number of demand for cybersecurity analysts increased by 66% last year. These are not like hyperventilating management consultancies trying to drum up business. These are boring government bureaucrats. And they see our talent crisis. And I know you see it because you feel it every day. So, yeah, there we go. All right, right on. We also find ourselves at board meetings. How many of y'all get invited to board meetings nowadays? How many of you was that true 5 years ago? A few, but not many, right? Indeed, I'm getting calls from CIOs today asking how to better engage with their CISO because their CISO has got better access to the board of directors than the CIO does. And this isn't some very large organizations. It's kind of strange, the sort of reversal there. And indeed, that mimics why I moved from CIO and CEO research into cybersecurity, because this is the last and most interesting set of problems for us to solve as an industry. This is the great sort of domain for us to tackle, right? We have other sort of dimensions we need to be playing with. Privacy and data protection are entering the mainstream. They are indeed becoming business and competitive differentiators for organizations. Ransomware has become a business model all on its own. I don't need to tell you about that. Third-party risk, again, supply chain risk. What we're seeing right now, 44% of our CEOs that we survey say that they are going to enter or leave another country in the next 5 years. 25% of those say that that country might be China. What that means for us is that we are going to have to adopt or be able to support and facilitate rapid supply chain flexibility and agility, which is, again, going to compound our third-party risk issues. And then, of course, we also have emerging technology, Web 3.0, expanded data and analytics, and, of course, AI. The convergence of AI and humans, as was this talk's promise, is actually shaping up to be sort of what we call a combinatorial effect inside of cybersecurity and digital business as a whole. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is our CIOs, our CEOs, we have been amazing at digital transformation to the point that there is no such thing as a manual process anymore. You want to test that? What's the most manual process I can think of? Getting an oil change. I can change my oil in my backyard. I don't need a computer, Lee. What are you talking about? Yeah, but if I want to take it to a shop, the work order gets printed by a computer. If the systems are down, the mechanic can't get paid. And oh, by the way, my car is a moving supercomputer on wheels. And if you don't tell it it has had an oil change, it will yell at me continuously until some computer does tell it that it's had an oil change. There is no part of our enterprise that is not fundamentally digitally vulnerable, which is making our jobs a little bit harder. Yeah? No? That was the affirmation part of the moment. We're all supposed to go, oh, it is getting harder. Show us the way, Lee. Show us how to make it easier. The way we're going to make it easier is by scaling differently, which is why we're going to keep coming back to this sort of theme of scale. My job is to sort of lay down Gartner's predictions for you over this next period of time, and the overall sort of macro level prediction I want to give you is that in order to succeed in this future, we must scale differently. And I'm going to be continuing to come back to that as a theme through this talk. Let's talk a little bit about predictions. I happen to sit on Gartner's Top Predicts team. That team is a team that basically does all of the Gartner top predictions across the entire organization, and I'm a peer reviewer for any prediction that occurs, obviously, inside the security domain. We get, I think last year we got something like close to about 1,000 predictions across the entire organization, and we have a really rigorous process of peer reviewing, testing, and making sure that those predictions are things that we can actually stand behind. But I want to be really clear about what we mean by a prediction, because you'll notice this thing up here does not say prediction, it says strategic planning assumption. That's what we make as predictions. Our predictions are based on vector, that is velocity and direction, and inertia. Right? How much mass is going behind a thing? How fast is it moving? Where is it going to? We try and identify trend lines. I can't actually make honest-to-goodness predictions because predictions about the future, it turns out to be, are really, really difficult, says the person who said that the internet was CB radio for geeks. In all fairness, the internet is social media now, so it's really CB radio for grandmothers. But anyway, that's me trying to be funny. Again, if I say anything completely ridiculous or out of the ordinary for a Gartner analyst, I am probably trying to be hyperbolic or at least interesting at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning. It is my job to be your little shot of caffeine here. But let's take a look back at some of our predictions. Gartner likes us to go back and look at the ones that we got right, we got wrong. Like in 2006, we did say that Vista was going to be the last major operating system coming out of Microsoft Windows. That turns out not necessarily to be true. We also said that 1 million consumers would monetize their own personal data. Is anybody here monetizing your personal data? I am not. But everyone else is. So that might be a prediction that we didn't get exactly right, but on the other side, when we look at what organizations are doing, organizations are monetizing the heck out of their own data in order to increase supply chain efficiency, in order to increase operational efficiency, or even mission execution. Organizations are monetizing the heck out of their data. Are individuals doing it? Not as much. That's okay. What about this one? 10% of computers will be learning rather than processing. That was a prediction that was due to come true by 2017. Did that come true? I don't know. But I would challenge you to walk the show floor this afternoon and find anybody out there that doesn't say that they got AI on their thing. At least since ChatGPT, everybody's claiming to be doing a lot more learning rather than just ordinary, boring, regular old ordinary processing. What others? A corporate cloud policy or a corporate no cloud policy will be as rare as a no internet policy is today. Any of us organizations still have no cloud policies? I helped intelligence agencies to find their cloud policies. If an intelligence agency can have a cloud policy, you can have a cloud policy, I promise. So what does this mean? Kind of looking back, and we do like to do this as well as ourselves. Indeed, my colleague Jeremy DeHaan, I like to say he is my personal Gartner Google. He knows every prediction we've ever made, and he is more than happy to tell me on a fairly regular basis we meet every Tuesday where I've gotten those wrong. We do like to go back and look at these so that we can verify and check our methodologies, and also, simply to point out to you that occasionally we get a couple of these things right. I want to point out one other thing, and I'm not trying to ping anybody or anything like that, but I've seen a number of journalist articles out here, and I'm not here to do a Gartner commercial either. That is not what I'm here for. That's not what you're here for. But I have seen journalist articles out there like, hey, I asked ChatGPT to give me its list of top 10 strategic predictions. And then I asked Bard, and then I asked Copilot, and I was able to get 4 of these lists. See how amazing that is. I give you 1. That's the value proposition. You get 1 list out of me, not 4. And you can talk to the analysts who actually made the prediction. That's my Gartner commercial. Thank you. All right. Let's get into figuring out what the future will indeed hold, in addition to the fact that 95% of cloud security failures will ultimately be the customer's fault. So what does the future hold? We have 8 predictions this year, rolling from the end of this year forward through to 2028. And as much as I would like to portray these as some sort of linear program or body of work that you can follow, definitely feel free to take pictures of these slides. Feel free to tweet these slides. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not going to broadcast that. I'm also on DEF CON Social. That's on the title page. We have a number of these, and they're not just technology predictions. They're not just technology issues we're going to have to deal with. This is part of that convergence we're talking about, the human deal, the AI deal, technology coming together and converging. Okay? So I'm not going to read all these to you, but they do go across a bunch of different domains. So let's talk about the first one. Number 1, by 2024, modern privacy regulation will blanket the majority of customer data, but less than 10% of organizations will have successfully weaponized privacy as a competitive advantage. Let's play with some data points here. If you want a quote, here's your quote. By the end of this year, there will be more consumers covered by data protection law than have access to clean drinking water. There's your quote. Now, the first thing that pops into my head when I say that out loud is we should fix the drinking water thing. I don't know what we're doing in this room. But we are in this room, so let's talk about what we can actually do. What we can actually do is help our organizations understand that privacy is moving beyond simply a compliance and regulatory activity. It is indeed still a compliance and regulatory activity, and it is indeed one of the number 1 threat outcomes we can face is still a breach because it triggers fines. And those are often bad, I think, if your job is to make money. Fines are often against that. But what does weaponizing privacy mean? Well, I stood on a stage in another room here in this building a few years back, and I threw up a slide that said, what's the difference between these 2 companies, Google and the NSA? They both read all your emails. They do. They do. And those 24-year-olds in the basement in Fort Meade, are really just trying to protect us from terrorists, and yet something about the lack of transparency, something about the lack of understanding what they intend to do with that data makes it feel a little sketchy that, some 24-year-old without a girlfriend in a basement in Maryland is looking at my emails and wondering what I'm doing. That was like a whole bunch of biases. I know one of those people. I'm super making fun here. A little bit of inside baseball. But Google, right, has a promise not to be evil, and we trust them, and they give us an email client, and they give us basically unlimited storage, and, as they read my emails, they read them for the purposes of throwing me products that I think I might like, and it turns out I like products, right? Buy and consume, it's a big part of my life. This is what weaponization of privacy means. It means customers, when you have an ethos around privacy, customers will trust you. Apple actually used privacy as a marketing and search keyword for their advertisements, and they built an entire value chain around that, and we've seen their revenues in some markets increase by up to 44% as a result of just focusing on privacy and going all in on that. What does that actually mean for us? I'm pointing lasers at people rather than cooking sides. So what are our implications? Privacy is going to become much more than just a compliance obligation. Customer trust, mission doer trust, our citizen trust. Citizen trust in government is at an all-time low, by the way. So citizen trust, the trust of the warfighter, the trust of the people that you exist to serve becomes an increasingly important distinction that organizations can make. And customers are using privacy as a function of buying decisions. This isn't just B2B customers who have often cared a lot about privacy and or intellectual property rights and the amount of information that they're exchanging with their partners. Why don't we have smartphone capabilities in all cars everywhere? Because the companies that make those are arguing about who gets to own the data and who gets to monetize it. That's why we don't have smartphone capabilities embedded in every car. That's why it took a long time to even get CarPlay in some cars. Because the privacy, the data monetization are often at odds with each other. But if we can bring those things into harmony, there's real, actual opportunities here for our enterprise. And this is one of the domains where I think we have the opportunity to up and shift left. And shifting left is one of those ways that we are going to be able to scale differently. What do I mean by shifting left? Shifting left is moving further to the left in the SDLC, the software development lifecycle. Why? Because the software development lifecycle is where business ideas become technology and software that people do. And the further we are to the left in that cycle, where ideas happen, we can actually shape the way that the enterprise consumes and uses data, which can make it easier to weaponize data and weaponize privacy to customer advantage. I was dealing with a school system in Australia. They were very concerned about the amount of PII that they were capturing about their students. And they had to capture a lot of it, right, just to qualify people into the school. But like, get rid of it. Get rid of it, right? As soon as you can, like, adopt strategic forgetting strategies, right? And I know that all of our organizations, right, they exist. They don't exist to process data, but they process data as a function to exist. And the idea of maybe erasing data, getting rid of it, sounds like a terrible idea, but AI. But AI. AI is a bias amplifier. AI is a bias amplifier. They are data-driven algorithms. And if you don't let AI forget, it will maintain and amplify those biases forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. There was a cool talk about the space shuttle that talked about why no part on the space shuttle is wider than a horse's ass. Because that's the width of a Roman carriage, two of them, which is also the width of rail gauge, and they're transporting it's like what part of your budget isn't based on the past? Are we still designing our budgets? Are we still designing our strategies? Are we still designing our notions around the past? If you go on Amazon today and buy something exotic like a robot toilet, I have 3 robot toilets that I bought after I went to Japan several years ago. They are amazing and game-changing. If you do not own a robot toilet, buy a robot toilet. I own no stock in robot toilet companies, I promise. But if you go on Amazon and buy a robot toilet, what do you wind up getting ads for the next 3 months? Robot toilets. Because they don't do strategic forgetting. Even the best people in the world at monetization for retail and data monetization for retail can't manage to do strategic forgetting. What happens if I get an ad for a robot toilet after I bought a robot toilet? The number of returns for robot toilets increase. Because if you give me an ad for a toilet other than the one I bought, you just created buyer's remorse. Congratulations. Bad idea. Again, I understand these are business issues, and we may not necessarily be deep into the cyber here, but this is an opportunity for us to move left, to start having those kinds of conversations with our business leaders, to show them how there are other alternatives, such as confidential computing or even synthetic data, where they might not necessarily need to use as much information as they have. And they can begin to get rid of it, to move fast and not break things, which is our ethos for the future. Privacy user experience is real. By committing to a privacy user experience, we are also committing to our market and showing our market or the people in the mission that we take this stuff very, very seriously and very really, which will also increase sort of our brand bona fides in that particular space. And then weaponizing privacy as a prospect competition or as a prospect conversation tool, particularly for those of you in B2B enterprises or for those of you who work for government agencies that work with other government agencies that have to exchange information and need to do so securely. Use your commitment to privacy, your data and your data and protection controls as a source of competitive advantage in being able to share that information. Next up, number 2. Anybody here feel like this morning? Hopefully it was just because we were partying too hard last night, not because there was an incident or a breach or something that you had to deal with. But number 2, by 2025, nearly half of cybersecurity leaders will change jobs. quarter of which for different roles entirely. Anybody here feel that? Anybody here with their boss and not want to raise their hand because they feel that much? It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Like I said in the opening with the IOC squared statistics, the U.S. Department of Labor statistics, we are being crushed under the weight of an ever-expanding digital business defense mission. This isn't just cybersecurity anymore. It isn't just about controls anymore. It's also about enterprise resilience. It's about privacy. Some of us are being asked to tackle AI because I told CIOs like a decade ago that they needed to be business people, and somebody listened to me for some silly reason, and now they all are, and we're the only people who understand technology left in the enterprise. There's a little bit of hyperbole there, but I see you laughing. I know you know what I'm feeling here. Hybrid work is also making it just incredibly difficult for us to disengage, to turn off our phones, to not be constantly on call. The rules of our engagement have got to change. We cannot continue to operate using this sort of cadence, using this sort of pattern. We have got to figure out a way to retain the people that we have and grow people that we don't have inside of our organizations, or even look inside of our organizations for other sources of talent. I was talking with the head of a large treasury department for a very large government, and they were asking me, oh my gosh, all my cyber pros, I train them up and they leave after 3 years. I was like, what about your auditors? People who carry guns, like your actual investigators, they have a real reason to stay with the agency. They've got career. And by the way, the difference in an auditor and a hacker's brain are basically none, right? There's big difference between a hacker and an engineer's brain. Engineers are typically problem solvers. Hackers are problem finders. What are auditors? Auditors are problem finders. Yes, 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 yes. That very basic mindset can be adapted and trained and scaled to meet different missions. So what we really want to do here is focus on prioritizing our culture shifts. We want to enhance autonomous risk making. My friends over at Johnson & Johnson have got a great model there. They have weaponized their acceptable use policy. Whenever a business technologist or somebody wants to download a new low-code tool, it asks them 3 questions. Hey, are you going to be using any privileged data? Are you going to be integrating with anything else? If the answer to that question is no, you are on the green path. Go, have fun, knock yourself out. If you are going to be using privileged or privileged data or PII, then maybe we do need to talk about how to use synthetic data or other alternatives. And then the last path, which is interestingly enough called the blue path, not the red path. So it's green, yellow, blue, which is incidentally amazing branding, by the way. We don't ever want to say there's a red path. On the blue path, if your idea is good enough, cybersecurity will advocate for you on IT's behalf to get IT to do it for you. They claim that they have scaled their mission to accommodate over 270,000 business technology projects without adding a single cybersecurity FTE. That's pretty good that's pretty good scalability right there. But that is all about creating and inculcating a thing that we call cyber judgment, letting people be largely autonomous in the administration of their own cyber capabilities. Think of this like reverse franchising. What we're telling CIOs this year is they need to embed people in the business, right? They need to help those business technologists and accelerate their transformation and basically offload as much of that to them as possible. We're not going to be able to do that. We can't embed people in the business, but we can bring business and technology people to us. And we have a great value proposition to add for them because cybersecurity aware developers make a lot more money than those that aren't. Right? People who are deep in this industry have greater earning potential than those just sitting on the sideline waiting for AI to come and take their job. That was, again, it's a joke. That was a joke. That was hyperbole. That was hyperbole. All right. One of the big factors I want us to use here, and one of the things I would love for you to start tracking, is looking at the amount of sort of human error inside your own organization. This is not a thing I want you to publicize to the board, obviously, but I do want you to use that as a key performance indicator of your own organization's ability to sort of manage its workload. Because when human errors inside of cybersecurity go up, that means our workloads and our tasks lists are getting too deep. Right? We're working too long, we're burning the candle at both ends. So use that as a metric for your own people's sort of performance and your own leadership performance in helping these people migrate through kind of the amount of stress and strain that we have in our job. But the big way we're going to solve that again is by shifting left. So what's a great opportunity to shift left? Business process consulting. for cybersecurity. A lot of the cybersecurity problems we face could be fixed at the business process level. I was talking with a trucking company. They were getting loads hijacked, not cyber hijacking like people stealing containers. And the way that they were stealing containers, the threat actors were impersonating drivers. This company did like bid asks, right? Hey, this container just came in. We want to ship it up to Seattle, right? Who will drive it for 26 cents a mile? And people were impersonating the drivers, getting bills of lading, and then they could walk on there and steal a container full of PlayStations. Human two-factor authentication can fix that. They asked me, hey, how can we trace a Gmail address back to China? I'm like, don't do that. Just don't let anybody change their email address in your system without verifying it with the last known good address. Don't let people change their relationship with you without making sure that they're the ones really doing that. That's not insane. That's very easy, and that's actually super straightforward to do. And when you fix problems at the business process level, it costs about $5, for example, to fix. When you fix them in production, it costs about $50,000 to fix. Several orders of magnitude more expensive the further you get to the right. By 2025, 50% of cybersecurity leaders will have tried, and unsuccessfully, to use cyber risk quantification to drive enterprise decision making. Anybody here do a lot of CRQ? I'm about to tell you that you shouldn't. All right, I'm going to be even more bold than that, and I might be borderline hyperbolic in this. Cyber risk quantification, inside-out quantification of risk, is a fool's errand. It is a fool's errand. Let me tell you, because of the uniqueness of every operating environment, the vulnerability that goes into your environment and just utterly destroys it might bounce right off of mine. What does that mean? That means you cannot predict probability. And because you cannot predict probability, inside-out cyber risk quantification really is not a thing that you can do. We can create some interesting scenarios, but you really can't figure out probability. Well, Lee, maybe we just don't have enough data. Let's look at other insurance markets. Maybe they're better. Auto insurance, you can't figure out the probability of a car accident, can you? No, probably not. Although there are leading indicators, like, I don't know, any of you have one of these apps on your phone? Like, when I drive, if I brake suddenly, USAA will tell me that I've been braking suddenly, or that I've been talking on my phone, or that I've been texting while I'm driving. They're tracking leading indicators to accidents, by the way. So you can. But the big difference between cyber and auto accidents is this. If I hit a pedestrian in a crosswalk at 35 miles an hour, I can model the outcome. The CVE that completely blows up your environment might not do anything in mine. You cannot measure probability, and you can't even really measure outcome. But what I can measure is from the outside in. If I just flip this problem around in my head, instead of thinking about all the thousands of CVEs that exist out there, there's really only 4 threat outcomes. They are denial. Doesn't matter whether it's a denial of service attack or an asteroid hits my data center, it's denial. Tampering, like changing the payee in a procure-to-pay process. Exfiltration, which is stealing data but letting me still have it, which typically results in fines. And or theft of intellectual property, theft of assets, and denial of those assets or capability. If I take those and map them against a value chain or against my existing business impact assessments, that's super easy. That's a process that you could do over a few lunches. And it actually gives you way better information that you can go to your stakeholders and talk about what the impact of a business interruption might be, what the impact of a denial might be, what the impact of tampering or these other external effects or threat outcomes might be. It gives you a way better lens to actually characterize to the enterprise how things might be different. As a consequence, what we are espousing here is outside-in threat quantification, not risk quantification, building it around the value chain. I've got a note on that will be out, by the way, in about the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, ideally, that will have a whole toolkit in it for Gartner clients if you want to learn how to do that. It has got the world's simplest model for how to do value stream mapping and sort of business decomposition. I intend to put an entire generation of management consultants out of business with this, because I can describe it about 3 paragraphs what they want to charge you $400,000 to do. That is not a joke, but intended to be a little bit funny anyway. What are our core actions here? Again, understand the limitations of CRQ data today. Probability is not something you can really predict as far as the probability of an incident happening or even the probability and impact of the incident from the inside out, though from the outside in, you can. Consider, as I said before, using your existing business impact assessments. use that as a measure to actually drive risk and risk quantification rather than the inside-out model. Because I tell you, when we talk about risk quantification, we are on exactly the opposite page as our CFOs. Where when you talk to a CFO about risk quantification, it's net present value over future value. It is a super simple sort of thing to do if you understand calculus, which I don't anymore. All right? It is relatively straightforward, but in our world, it seems like it should be straightforward, but indeed it is not because the variables are too difficult to predict. But from the outside in, they already do. If you're in asset manufacturing of any kind, you already know what it would cost if that factory was down for a week. Because the people who do asset maintenance on those machines have already built business cases, which means there's an existing belief inside your organization about the value of those things. Springboarding off of that belief is a much better way of getting access to resources and actually demonstrating the efficacy of your threat management programs beyond deep diving into FAIR until you lose your minds. And that's as far as I'm going to go on that because I don't want to really throw anybody under the bus. And of course, there are a lot of vendors out there that are promising to be able to do this stuff automatically, and maybe they will. Maybe AI will solve this problem for us and actually be able to do these predictions. But be super skeptical about that. What we really want is an agile environment where continuous threat and exposure management is interacting continuously with our cyber strategies and informing each other about where we need to be prioritizing and putting resources. Because our real task here is not trying to prevent every breach. Our real task here is not trying to prevent every breach. It is to try and keep every breach from rising to the level of materiality. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But anybody here freaked out about the SEC's materiality rules? I am not at all freaked out about the SEC's materiality rules, not even a little bit. I mean, yeah, it's going to be a thing, and we're going to have to be a little bit worried, but really what the materiality rule gave us was goalposts. It gave us goalposts. It's not about preventing every incident. It's about preventing an incident from rising to the level of materiality. And if you do that, you actually preserve shareholder value in two ways. First, you've prevented a material incident, which means you've maintained the numbers performance of your business. Therefore, you preserve shareholder value, and you preserve shareholder value from dilution as a result of broadcasting a material incident. So just do that. Understand when procurement is denied, when that starts to become material, and when you need to do things differently. For whatever reason, there is no headline for this one, which is a weird thing, but this one was about zero trust. But it just has the implications, which is fine. The implication there was that the headline was that half of you were going to attempt to do a zero trust thing, and only about 25% of you were going to actually realize benefits from that. Does that mean I hate zero trust? No, it does not mean that I hate zero trust. What it means is that zero trust is very, very hard because we still have applications with hard-coded IP addresses in them. We still have systems that are very closely coupled and very tightly coupled. And so, of course, zero trust can be very, very, very challenging. The big thing that I would prefer us to do in that kind of an environment would be to adopt sort of a zone defense model, which we'll be writing about and publishing about a little bit more later this year. But the idea of a zone defense model is this really radical notion, which, by the way, we promulgated probably about 12 years ago in IT, that the number one driver of IT cost and complexity was the pace of change of the business. And that some parts of the business change really fast. Those are systems of innovation. Some parts change really slow. Those are systems of record. And some are kind of in between. Those are systems of differentiation. And by organizing our IT portfolios in that way, we could attain IT agility, which, congratulations, we have. We need to do the same thing in cybersecurity because it turns out that the number one driver of cybersecurity complexity, cost, and risk is, ready, drum roll, the pace of change of the business. And by simply organizing our systems, not just conceptually, but even all the way down to a software architecture level, by organizing our systems, even in those three groupings, systems of innovation, systems of differentiation, systems of record, and having different policies and different controls to enable different paces of change, while that may seem more complicated, it actually radically simplifies our approach to zero trust. Why? Because those applications with the hard-coded IP addresses that are closely coupled that you can't disintegrate from each other and we can't create a trust model between typically exist in the same zone. And so we can have inter-zone trust without intra-zone trust, meaning that database that Mary in marketing is running under her desk on a server for the past 15 years is fine as long as it exists in a system of innovation or a zone of innovation and no data can get in or out of it or pollute our systems of record. So our main sort of task that we want to do here is begin prioritizing critical assets first, our systems of record, those systems of differentiation, the things that actually drive and empower our business, and then combine that zero trust sort of mindset with other sort of accelerators, like what I was talking about with our zone defense model. And then we need to communicate to the business that this is definitely not going to be a one-time investment. There is not just a tool we can buy and get it done. This is going to be a continuous sort of process of renovating our IT landscape and estate as we move more and more and more towards an explicit trust model. And by the way, I realize that we are not the ones that coined the term zero trust. I'm not trying to throw a dart at anybody that did, but I played a branding expert on TV for a little while, and I will tell you the notion of zero trust is just terrible branding. Explicit trust is better. Explicit trust is better. The enterprise already thinks we don't trust them. We don't need to pour gas on that mindset at all. All right? Number 5, through 2026, more than 80% of threat detection, investigation, and response capabilities will leverage exposure management data to validate and prioritize and detect threats, up from 5% today. What does that mean? That means we are pouring gas on our XDR capabilities. We are moving beyond just endpoint and network all the way to identity threat detection response, and we are beginning to integrate these capabilities. My buddy Patrick Heveshy is around here somewhere. He's another Gartner analyst. If you don't know him, he's got a concept called the cybersecurity mesh architecture. Definitely look that up, because what that is actually an architecture that talks about tool signal integration. And beyond that, because the big problem with integrated threat detection and response capabilities today is actually weak signal detection across tools. It is the ability, I realize I'm not clicking through these fast enough. Usually there's somebody who does that, I apologize. But I'll click through so that you can read the slide. The main idea here is we want to have a continuous threat and exposure management program, but in order to do that, a lot of the telemetry, a lot of our tools are not designed to integrate with each other, because tool vendors tend to design for differentiation rather than integratability. So one, integration should be the very first thing you ask any tool vendor, particularly about weak signal integration, because we really need to be thinking about trapping and interpreting these signals as they occur. My main thing that I would encourage you to do here, beyond the technology aspect of it and beyond CTEM, which I would definitely encourage you also to take a look at, is start to think, just really simply do a bit of a mindset switch here. And a friend of mine told this to me, and when he told it, it kind of changed my brain, so I'm just going to give it to you. If you look at the MITRE attack chain and think of it as a map, right? Think of it as a map. Most of the activity actually happens in the left six or 6 columns of the kill chain or the attack chain, but most of the damage happens in the right 2 or 3. Right? What this does is this actually gives, this is the case for weak signal detection. If we can detect those signals while they're still happening on the right-hand side of the kill chain, where a lot of activity is happening, a lot of reconnaissance is happening, where persistence is being created and enabled, if we can, even leveraging the intelligence, if we find an IOC way over on the right, being able to trace that back and understand how our systems are compromised and how the threat actors are moving through our environment, gives us that ability again to sort of scale those capabilities differently, but we're going to need weak signal tool detection. We might need to change our mindset about where we focus and prioritize some of our energies. I want to leave some time for questions too, and I realize we only got about 12 minutes left. But good news is I only got 2 more of these, and then we can actually talk with each other. How about that? Number 6, 70% of boards will include 1 member with cybersecurity expertise. As I mentioned before, the new SEC rules around materiality and materiality reporting for cybersecurity incidents has changed the relationship between CISOs and their boards of directors. And that is not a bad thing. That is a very, very, very good thing, with one notable exception. Anybody here have a board member that thinks they know about cybersecurity but doesn't actually? That there are still a couple of fraudsters and hucksters in our business, and they are still getting on boards of directors, and they might be pushing back on things that they don't know as much about, or even if they did have a lot of experience back in the day, our world changes pretty quickly. as a result of all of these different things. And so what we really need to do is recognize that the makeup of our board is going to be different. We need to become a lot more mindful of who our board members are, what their background and experience are, and actually begin to tailor our communications to those folks. Because if you have that board member who today thinks they know a lot about cyber, but is actually causing you a lot of trouble because they think they know a lot, but they don't actually know a lot, use that as an opportunity to make that person smarter. And in the process of making them smarter and more capable, which enriches their value to other boards, by the way, we also make them an ally to us. They become an ally and place on the board rather than somebody who is, throwing unnecessary oversight and trying to micromanage us. I was talking with a company just last week, a brand that we would all know, whose board is currently micromanaging the heck out of them. And I'm helping them kind of manage the politics of those sorts of environments. So our key action, again, get ahead of the change, understand who's going to be on your board, formalize accountability of cyber risk through a risk charter. The number one thing that I would encourage every single person in this room to do, if you are a CISO or anybody with a CISO-like title in an SEC-regulated or chartered company, is to go to your chief legal counsel and get a definition of, one, materiality, and two, ask them who the responsible officer is for cybersecurity in your organization. Because many of us have CISO titles, which have officer in the word, but almost none of us, and by almost none of us, I do not know a single CISO, period, who is a Title 16 registered corporate officer. What does that mean? Well, corporate officers, your CEO has the ability to act somewhat autonomously. Your CFO, in reporting to the board, has the ability to act somewhat autonomously. Any of you feel like you have the ability to act autonomously, or do you feel like you get fired if you started talking to the board behind your CEO's back? That's the point. We're not real officers, and I'm not saying that to make anybody feel bad, right? Most organizations, most corporations only have 3 real officers. They are the CEO, the CFO, and the chief legal counsel, usually, maybe the corporate secretary, depends on your corporate governance structure. I'm not a lawyer, I don't even play one on TV. But the reality is most of us aren't. I don't know if a single CISO is. If you are a Title 16 chartered officer of your corporation as a CISO, please come and tell me so that I can stop saying that from stage. I would love to know one. But most of us aren't, even of very, very, very large organizations. But I know of CISOs who are being threatened with personal fines that will not be covered by directors and officers' insurance in an effort to try and get them to flip on their CFO and CEO. That's for real. So the best thing you could do to protect yourself in that environment is actually have your organization define who's really responsible for cybersecurity, who's responsible for cybersecurity outcomes, and who actually has the ability to autonomously report to the board in those particular regards. And then establish that as a relationship. What I would encourage you to do, again, with your operating committee, digital business operating committee, or whatever, is just simply build a RACI chart of who does what, who's responsible for what, who's responsible for what communications. You can still sign attestations and those sorts of things, but we need to have a clear definition of hierarchy of corporate governance here that does not exist in most organizations yet. Number 7. 75% of employees will acquire, modify, or create technology outside of IT's visibility, up from 41% by 2022. That is already rapidly coming true. But the good news is this is also an amazing opportunity for us to scale differently. And the reason why I say that is twofold. First and foremost, if 44, probably close to 50 to 60% of those folks today are building technology projects inside your enterprise and stuff isn't just blowing up and falling over, somebody's doing something right. We should pour gas on the things that people are doing right. The other thing is I think there are tremendous opportunity in low and no-code tools, because low and no-code tools can be deployed inside of containers. They can have controls embedded in them. We can create a computational model where what people can do with a computer is not everything that a computer can do. This is one of my biggest problems with our whole industry, honestly, is that because it came out of the hobbyist industry, today a computer can do anything that any computer can do. And that's just crazy talk, because most people don't need that out of a computer. Most people don't need to overclock their processors or encrypt their hard drives or, talk to TCP/IP ports directly or any of that stuff. And as a consequence, it increases our overall vulnerability. But when we start actually thinking about not trying to stop these folks, but enable them, we can give them tools, we can give them capabilities that are sort of known good and pre-secured to begin with. And engaging in an agile R&D process with your business to continuously examine and vet those tools functions as an accelerator and begins to move you more to the left. The thing I am most afraid of is we're going to skip right over low code, no code, and go directly to AI-generated code, and that is going to make our lives orders and orders and orders and orders of magnitude more complicated. Particularly when you consider the number of build chain attacks that are happening nowadays, and the fact that even tool vendors are being concerned about the fact that we can have keyloggers embedded inside of IDEs that can be injecting code into things that we don't even know about. And our last one, and I want to do this last one before I turn us over to questions. And I apologize I didn't leave the implication slide up there too long, but you can download it. The last one is the one that if we don't do anything else, I want you to do this. 50% of large organized CISOs will have adopted human-centric practices to minimize cybersecurity, induce friction, and maximize control adoption. What am I saying there? What I'm saying there is quite just straight up. We did a survey a few years ago that said that something like 77% of workers in enterprises intentionally violated a control inside the organization. They knew it was going to make the organization or increase the organization's risk exposure, and something like 93% of those people said they would totally do it again. Why? Does that mean they are unaware of security and security implications? No, it does not mean that they're unaware of security and security implications. What it means is, and this isn't even our fault, I'm not going to say this is all our fault, I'm not going to say this is because of our controls. What I'm saying is that we live in a world that was created over in Silicon Valley, a digital world, that tries to customize itself to everything that we want to be. And then you show up to work and nothing works that way. Nothing, not cybersecurity, nothing works that way. Nothing works that way. And because nothing works that way, we have habituated users to the workaround. The workaround is firmly engaged or embedded inside of the technology culture of most organizations. And as a consequence, they see no difference between working around a cybersecurity control versus working around how I enter my expenses in Oracle. There's no difference in their mind. But one of the key things that we can do by simply telling people, so Santander, Banco Santander in Spain, did this. They became obsessed with the cybersecurity user experience. They started going to users, and monitoring them. Hey, when you're, instead of, paying them for violating controls or, for trying to use, out-of-band USB sticks or whatever other controls that they're violating, they would go to people and go, hey, why are you violating this control? Help me understand it. What's wrong with the workflow? How can we make the workflow easier? How can we design the control into the natural flow of your work so that you don't encounter the control? I envision, folks, an Xbox-like computing experience in the future. The Xbox, by the way, is the single world's most secure Windows computing platform on the planet. You never encounter a control on an Xbox, ever. I mean, you might be asked to log on, but I can do that with my joystick. And there's lots of things I can't do on an Xbox. I can't encrypt the hard drive. I can't talk to TCP IP ports directly. I can't get shell access. I can't even delete a file. But anything that I want to do, if I want to download a game and I don't have enough room, it'll just automatically clear up the room for me. This is what I mean. When we start to engage further to the left, we can design business processes into the natural flow of work. We can design controls into those processes, into the natural flow of work, so that people aren't intentionally violating our controls. Because my headline here, and my last phrase to you beyond what I say in my closing is this: a control that is intentionally bypassed is worse than no control at all, because it creates a false sense of security. Folks, my name is Lee. I'm exactly the sort of dude that's got the kind of mommy issues that means I need to get up and dance around in front of people in order to feel good about myself for the rest of the day. You have totally given that to me. I hope I've given you something of equal or greater value in return. Thank you.